I was 22 when my stepfather threw my laptop bag across the living room, watching it crash against the wall like it was worthless garbage. The screen cracked on impact, splitting right down the middle, just like our relationship had been splitting for years. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding in agreement like she always did when he made his declarations. "Maybe now you'll get off your ass and find a real job instead of playing on that thing all day," he sneered, his voice dripping with the same contempt he'd shown me since the day he married my mother 5 years ago. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. Not because I was afraid of showing weakness, but because I knew something they didn't. While they thought I was wasting my life scrolling through social media and playing games, I had just closed my biggest client contract ever. 24 hours before that laptop hit the wall, I had signed a deal that would change everything. And in 18 months, when they were panicking about their rent increase, when they were scrambling to find a new place to live, when they were desperate and calling me for the first time in over a year, I would be the one holding the keys to their building. My name is Riley, and the family who called me a lazy failure just became my tenants. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you had looked at our apartment from the outside, you'd think we were just another working-class family making ends meet in downtown Portland. 3-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a converted brick building, decent neighborhood. Close to the max line. But inside those walls, there was a war being fought every single day between who I was and who they thought I should be. My mother, Sandra, worked double shifts at the hospital as a nursing assistant. She was tired all the time, stressed about money constantly, and somewhere along the way she decided that my quiet nature meant I was lazy. When she married Derek 3 years into my college career, everything got worse. Derek was a foreman at a construction company, the kind of man who believed that if you weren't covered in dirt and sweat by 5 p.m., you hadn't really worked. He looked at me sitting at my computer for hours and saw laziness. What he didn't see were the coding bootcamps I was completing online, the freelance web development projects I was finishing at 3 in the morning, or the business plan I was quietly building while he complained about my screen time. They had no idea that while they were watching TV after dinner, I was teaching myself Python, JavaScript, and database management. While they were gossiping about the neighbors on weekends, I was building websites for small businesses and learning about digital marketing strategies. When they saw me researching on my laptop for hours, they assumed I was watching videos or chatting with friends. In reality, I was studying real estate investment strategies, analyzing market trends, and slowly building a portfolio that would eventually change my life. The worst part wasn't the criticism, it was the way they talked about me to other people. I'd overhear my mother on the phone with her sister saying things like, "Riley's still figuring things out. She spends all day on that computer, but nothing comes of it." Or Derek telling his buddies during barbecues, "My stepdaughter thinks she's going to make it big on the internet. Kids these days don't want to do real work." Every comment was like a small knife, cutting away at my confidence, making me question whether I was actually building something meaningful or just fooling myself. But I kept going because I had a vision they couldn't see. I wasn't just learning to code for fun. I wasn't building websites as a hobby. I was creating multiple income streams, developing skills that were in high demand, and positioning myself in an industry that was growing exponentially. While they worried about my lack of a traditional job, I was earning more from my freelance work than either of them made in their full-time positions. The difference was that my income was invisible to them. Digital payments, online contracts, virtual meetings, none of it looked like real work to people who equated value with visible physical effort. I tried to explain it once. I showed my mother a contract I had just signed with a startup in Seattle, worth $15,000 for a 3-month web development project. She looked at the email, handed my phone back, and said, "That's nice, honey. But when are you going to get a steady job with benefits? It was like speaking different languages. They couldn't understand that the future of work was changing. That location independence was becoming the norm. That some of the most valuable skills in the modern economy were exactly what I was developing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I had been working for 14 hours straight, finishing a rush project for a client who needed their e-commerce site launched before a major product release. I was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, but I was also excited because this project was going to put me over the threshold I had set for myself. With this payment, I would finally have enough saved for the down payment I had been planning for months. Derek came home from work around 6, covered in sawdust and clearly in a bad mood. He looked at me sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, surrounded by notebooks and empty coffee cups, and something in him snapped. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "You've been sitting there all day doing nothing while your mother and I are out working real jobs. I'm tired of supporting someone who won't even try to contribute to this household." I tried to explain that I was working, that I had just completed a major project, that I was actually earning money from what I was doing, but he wasn't interested in listening. "Playing on a computer isn't work," he shouted. "Building websites for imaginary businesses isn't a career. You're 22 years old, and you're acting like a teenager who thinks she's going to become famous on YouTube." My mother, who had just walked in from her shift, immediately took his side. "Derek's right, Riley. You need to face reality. Get a job at the mall, work in a restaurant, do something that actually contributes. We can't keep carrying you while you chase these internet fantasies." The word fantasies hit me like a physical blow. These weren't fantasies. I had bank statements showing consistent income. I had client testimonials praising my work. I had a business that was growing every month. But in their eyes, none of it mattered because it didn't fit their definition of legitimate employment. That's when Derek grabbed my laptop bag and hurled it across the room. The crash was loud enough that I'm sure the neighbors heard it. My laptop, which contained all my current projects, all my client files, all my carefully organized business documents, was now broken. "Maybe now you'll wake up and join the real world," he said, not even looking at the damage he had caused. I stared at the cracked screen, calculating in my head how much this would cost me. Not just the replacement cost, but the potential lost income from delayed projects, the professional embarrassment of having to explain to clients why their work would be late. In that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't the problem in this equation. They were. Their inability to understand my work didn't make it less valuable. Their fear of change didn't make my choices wrong. Their need to control me didn't give them the right to destroy my property or my dreams. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stood up slowly, walked over to my broken laptop, and carefully gathered the pieces. Then I looked at both of them and said something I had never said before. "I'm moving out." Derek laughed. "With what money? You're going to rent an apartment with your computer games?" My mother looked surprised. "Riley, don't be dramatic. We're just trying to help you grow up. You can't run away every time someone tells you the truth." But I wasn't running away. I was running towards something they couldn't see yet. "I have money," I said calmly. "More than you think. And I have clients who value my work, even if you don't. I'll be out by the weekend." The silence that followed was heavy. Derek looked confused, like he couldn't process what I had just said. My mother looked hurt, but also skeptical. "Honey, you can't just leave. Where would you go? How would you support yourself?" I didn't answer because I knew they wouldn't believe me anyway. Instead, I went to my room and started packing. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. Not consciously, but every skill I had learned, every client relationship I had built, Every dollar I had saved had been moving me toward independence. I had enough money in my business account to cover 6 months of rent and living expenses. I had a waiting list of clients who wanted to work with me. I had developed systems and processes that would allow me to work from anywhere with an internet connection. While they saw someone playing on a computer, I had actually been building the foundation for complete financial freedom. That night, after they went to bed, I sat on the floor of my room with my broken laptop and used my phone to email my biggest client, explaining that I would need to work from a borrowed computer for a few days while I sorted out my equipment situation. Within an hour, she had responded with sympathy and an offer to advance me payment so I could replace my laptop immediately. That's when I knew I had made the right choice. My clients treated me with more respect and understanding than my own. Family had shown me in years. I found a studio apartment downtown within 3 days. It was small but perfect for my needs. Good internet, quiet environment, walking distance to coffee shops where I could work when I needed a change of scenery. The landlord was a woman in her 50s who ran a small property management company. During the application process, she asked about my employment, and I explained that I was a freelance web developer and digital consultant. Unlike my family, she was impressed. "That's exactly the kind of tenant we love," she said. "Quiet, professional, flexible income, and you understand technology. Most of our other properties are going to people like you now. The economy is changing, and smart landlords are adapting." When I signed the lease, I felt something I hadn't felt in years living with Derek and my mother. I felt respected. I felt like my choices were valid. I felt like I could finally focus on building my business without constantly defending my existence. The first month in my own place was transformative. Without the constant criticism and interruption, my productivity doubled. I was able to take on bigger projects because I could work whatever hours suited the work, not whatever hours appeared normal to people who didn't understand my industry. I invested in a high-end laptop and a proper desk setup. I started taking video calls with clients instead of just communicating through email, which led to stronger relationships and higher-paying contracts. Most importantly, I began developing my own products instead of just doing client work. I created website templates that I could sell repeatedly, developed online courses teaching basic web development skills, and started building a software tool that would eventually become my biggest income source. Every day felt like progress. Every week brought new opportunities. Every month showed growth that I could track and measure and celebrate. Meanwhile, I heard nothing from my family. No calls to check if I was okay. No texts asking how I was managing. No acknowledgement that maybe they had been wrong about my capabilities. The silence was initially painful, but it gradually became liberating. I didn't have to explain my schedule to anyone. I didn't have to justify why I was working late or why I was researching instead of watching TV. I didn't have to defend my career choices or my business decisions. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely free to pursue my goals without interference. And in that freedom, I discovered just how much I was capable of achieving. Within 6 months of moving out, my monthly income had tripled. I was no longer just a freelancer taking whatever projects came my way. I had become a business owner with a clear vision, a growing team of contractors, and a reputation in my industry that was opening doors I had never imagined. The idea to buy real estate came from my landlord, actually. During one of our conversations about rent renewal, she mentioned that she was thinking about selling some of her smaller properties because she wanted to focus on larger commercial investments. "You should consider buying," she said casually. "You're exactly the kind of person who would do well as a property owner. You understand business, you're responsible, and you're already familiar with what makes a good rental property." At first, I laughed it off. I was barely 23 years old. Who would take me seriously as a real estate investor? But she planted a seed that began to grow. I started researching property investment strategies, learning about mortgages and cash flow analysis, studying neighborhood trends and rental markets. The more I learned, the more excited I became. This wasn't just about buying a place to live. This was about building wealth that would compound over time, creating passive income streams that would give me even more freedom to pursue my business goals. I discovered that my age was actually an advantage. I had decades ahead of me for investments to grow. I had the technical skills to research properties and analyze markets more efficiently than older investors who weren't comfortable with digital tools. Most importantly, I had the income and financial discipline to qualify for investment loans that many people my age couldn't access. When I applied for my first mortgage, the loan officer was initially skeptical about my self-employment income. But when I showed her 2 years of tax returns, bank statements proving consistent deposits, and contracts demonstrating ongoing client relationships, her skepticism turned to impressed curiosity. "You're one of the youngest investors I've worked with," she said, "but your financial picture is stronger than most people twice your age. You're going to do very well in real estate." The property I bought wasn't flashy or expensive. It was a small duplex in a transitioning neighborhood, the kind of place that was affordable now but showed signs of future growth. I lived in one unit and rented out the other, immediately reducing my living expenses while building equity. But this was just the beginning. I spent every free moment learning about property management, renovation strategies, and market analysis. I networked with other young investors online, joined real estate investment groups, and slowly built a plan for expanding my portfolio. What started as a practical solution to housing costs became a passion that complemented my technology business perfectly. Both required analytical thinking, long-term planning, and the ability to see opportunities that others missed. 18 months after that laptop crashed against the wall, I was ready to make the purchase that would change everything. The building where my family lived was going up for sale. It was a 40-unit complex that had been owned by the same family for 30 years, but the elderly owners were ready to retire and liquidate their assets. When I saw the listing, my heart started racing. This wasn't just any investment opportunity. This was the chance to buy the building where Derek and my mother had spent the last 3 years calling me lazy, where they had questioned my work ethic, where they had dismissed my dreams as fantasies. I ran the numbers carefully, analyzed the cash flow, researched the neighborhood trends, and calculated the renovation costs. Everything looked good, more than good. It looked like the perfect investment for someone ready to take on a larger project. But beyond the financial analysis, there was something poetic about the opportunity. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. This was the chance to prove in the most concrete way possible that everything they had said about me was wrong. While they had been working their traditional jobs and criticizing my choices, I had been building something they couldn't see. Now I was in a position to literally become their landlord, to hold the keys to the building they called home, to demonstrate that the lazy failure they had dismissed was actually more financially successful than they had ever imagined. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The morning I walked into my mortgage broker's office to discuss the building purchase, I wore a navy blazer my mother had never seen before and carried a leather portfolio that held more financial documentation than most people accumulate in a lifetime. At 24, I was about to make an offer on a $2-3 million property, and I had earned every penny of the down payment through late nights, rejected proposals, difficult clients, and the kind of persistent work that's invisible to people who equate effort with physical exhaustion. The broker, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my duplex purchase 18 months earlier, spread the property documents across her mahogany conference table and smiled. "Riley, I have to say, watching, your progression has been extraordinary. Most investors your age are still trying to qualify for their first home purchase. You're analyzing cash-on-cash returns and cap rates like someone who's been doing this for decades." But Patricia didn't know the full story. She didn't know that the building we were discussing wasn't just an investment property to me. She didn't know that units 4B and 4C were currently occupied by Derek Martinez and Sandra Collins. The two people who had spent years convincing me that my work was meaningless, that my dreams were unrealistic, that my quiet determination was actually laziness in disguise. As Patricia walked me through the financial projections, pointing out the strong rental history and the potential for value-add improvements, I was calculating something she couldn't see on any spreadsheet. I was calculating the exact moment when Derek would realize that his lazy stepdaughter had become his landlord, when my mother would understand that the daughter she thought was wasting her life had actually been building an empire while she slept. The due diligence process took 6 weeks, and during that time, I threw myself into research with the same intensity I had brought to every project that had gotten me to this point. I hired a professional property inspector, commissioned an environmental assessment, reviewed 5 years of financial records, and analyzed every lease in the building. What I discovered was even better than I had hoped. The property was well maintained but undervalued, situated in a neighborhood that was experiencing rapid growth due to new tech companies moving into the area. The current owners had been conservative, with rent increases, meaning there was significant upside potential. More importantly, most of the tenants were long-term residents with stable income who would likely stay through the ownership transition. This wasn't just a good investment, it was the perfect property for a first-time commercial real estate purchase. During those 6 weeks, I also did something that felt both necessary and slightly vindictive. I researched Derek and my mother's rental history. Since they didn't own their unit and had never mentioned any plans to buy, I knew they were month-to-month tenants like most people in the building. What I discovered through public records was illuminating. They had been late on rent 7 times in the past 2 years. Not catastrophically late, but late enough to incur fees and generate paperwork. They had also filed 3 maintenance requests in the last 6 months, complaining about everything from a leaky faucet to insufficient heating during the winter. In other words, they were exactly the kind of tenants who benefited from having a responsive, professional landlord. They were about to get one, though not in the way they might have expected. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, in late October. I arrived at the title company's office 30 minutes early, carrying the same leather portfolio and wearing a different but equally professional outfit. My business had grown to the point where I employed 2 full-time developers and had contracts with 6 major clients, but I had blocked out the entire day for this transaction. Some moments deserve your complete attention, and this was definitely one of them. When the elderly sellers arrived, they seemed genuinely pleased to be passing the property to someone young and enthusiastic. "We've owned this building for 31 years, the husband told me as we reviewed the final documents. "We've seen a lot of tenants come and go, and we've watched the neighborhood change and grow. It makes us happy to know someone with your energy and vision will be taking care of it." His wife added, "You remind us of ourselves when we started. We were young and ambitious, and everyone told us we were crazy to buy rental property. But look how it worked out. Building wealth through real estate is one of the smartest things young people can do, especially if they have the business sense to manage properties well." As I signed document after document, transferring ownership of 40 residential units from their family to mine, I thought about how different this conversation was from the ones I had been having with Derek and my mother just 2 years earlier. These strangers had more confidence in my abilities than my own family had ever shown. They saw potential where my family had seen laziness. They recognized ambition where my family had seen aimless computer use. The moment the transaction was complete, I owned the building where my family lived. Legally, officially, and financially, Derek and Sandra were now my tenants. The property management company that had been handling day-to-day operations would continue in that role, but all major decisions would flow through me. Rent increases, lease renewals, maintenance approvals, tenant communications, everything would ultimately come back to the 24-year-old woman they had dismissed as a lazy dreamer. I sat in my car outside the title company for 10 minutes after the closing, holding the keys to a building worth over $2 million, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 2 years earlier, I had been sleeping on an air mattress in a studio apartment, wondering if I would ever be able to prove that my family was wrong about me. Now I was a commercial real estate owner with a portfolio that most people twice my age would envy. But the real test wasn't the purchase itself. It was what I would do with the power that came with ownership. I could have immediately raised their rent to market rates, which would have been legally justified since the building had been under market for several years. I could have found reasons to decline their lease renewal, forcing them to find new housing in a competitive market. I could have made their lives difficult in 100 small ways, the kind of petty revenge that would have felt satisfying in the moment but ultimately diminished me as a person. Instead, I decided to be the landlord they had always deserved, to have, even if they didn't know it was me yet. Professional, responsive, fair, and focused on maintaining the property value while treating tenants with respect. The first test came sooner than I expected. 3 days after the closing, the property management company called with a maintenance request from Unit 4B. Derek had reported that the bathroom faucet was dripping and the water pressure in the shower was inconsistent. In the past, these kinds of requests had taken weeks to address because the previous owners lived out of state and relied entirely on the management company to prioritize repairs. I approved the work order immediately and asked them to use the highest-rated plumbing contractor in their network, regardless of cost. The repairs were completed within 48 hours, faster than Derek had probably ever experienced in his 3 years as a tenant. When the management company sent me the completion report, I smiled thinking about his surprise at the unusually quick response time. 2 weeks later, my mother called the management company about the heating system in Unit 4C. The furnace was working, but the temperature seemed inconsistent between rooms, and she was worried about the upcoming winter. Rather than dismissing her concern or scheduling a routine inspection for sometime next month, I authorized a complete HVAC system evaluation and approved the installation of a programmable thermostat that would give her better temperature control. The work was done within a week, and the technician reported that the system was now operating at peak efficiency. These weren't just maintenance decisions. They were character decisions. Every choice I made as a landlord reflected the kind of person I had become during my years of building a business while being told I was wasting my time. The really satisfying part wasn't the repairs themselves, but imagining Derek and my mother's conversations about their mysteriously improved living situation. I pictured them discussing the quick response times, the quality of the work, the fact that their new landlord seemed to actually care about tenant satisfaction. After years of dealing with a property owner who treated maintenance requests as inconveniences, they were now experiencing what it was like to have a landlord who understood that responsive service protected property values while building tenant loyalty. They had no idea that the person making these decisions was the same daughter and stepdaughter they had criticized for lacking work ethic and real-world understanding. Around this time, my business reached another major milestone that felt particularly meaningful, given everything that had happened. A Fortune 500 company approached me about developing a comprehensive digital platform that would integrate their customer service, inventory management, and sales tracking systems. The contract was worth more than Derek and my mother earned combined in an entire year, and it came with the possibility of ongoing support and expansion work that could sustain my business for the next 5 years. The project would require me to travel to their headquarters in Chicago for regular meetings, work with teams of developers and project managers, and present my recommendations to executives who controlled budgets larger than most small cities. As I prepared for the initial presentation, I thought about all the times Derek had dismissed my computer work as playing games, all the moments my mother had suggested I needed to find a real job with benefits and a predictable schedule. The executives I was about to meet didn't care whether my work looked traditional to outside observers. They cared about results, innovation, efficiency, and the ability to solve complex problems with elegant technological solutions. In their world, the skills I had been developing while Derek complained about my screen time were exactly the qualifications that commanded respect and premium compensation. While my family had been worried about whether my work was real enough, I had been building expertise in one of the most valuable and rapidly growing industries in the global economy. The presentation went better than I had dared to hope. Not only did they approve the initial project, but they asked me to expand the scope to include additional systems integration work and requested that I consider establishing a long-term consulting relationship with their company. The lead executive, a woman in her 40s who had built her career in technology management, pulled me aside after the meeting to offer some personal advice. "You have something that's rare in this industry," she told me. "You combine technical expertise with genuine business understanding. Most developers can write code, but they can't communicate with executives or understand how technology decisions affect company strategy. You're going to go very far if you keep developing both sides of your skill set." Her words meant more to me than she probably realized. Here was a senior executive at a major corporation, someone who had achieved exactly the kind of professional success my family claimed to value, telling me that my approach to work was not just valid, but exceptional. While Derek had been teaching me that real work required physical exhaustion and visible effort, the business world had been evolving toward exactly the kind of cognitive, strategic, technology-focused work that I had been developing. I wasn't behind the curve. I was ahead of it. I wasn't unprepared for the real world. I was building skills for the world that was rapidly emerging. The success with the Fortune 500 contract opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Word spread through professional networks, and I started receiving inquiries from other large companies who wanted similar technological solutions. I hired 2 additional developers and a project manager, transforming my business from a solo operation into a legitimate technology consulting firm with multiple ongoing contracts and a reputation for delivering complex projects on time and under budget. My monthly revenue grew to levels that would have seemed impossible when I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table, trying to explain why my laptop work was actually valuable. But the growth wasn't just financial. Every successful project built my confidence in ways that went far beyond business metrics. I was learning to lead teams, negotiate contracts, manage client relationships, and solve problems that required both technical skills and strategic thinking. I was developing the kind of professional presence that commanded respect in boardrooms and conference calls. Most importantly, I was proving to myself that the quiet determination my family had mistaken for laziness was actually one of my greatest strengths. While other people needed external motivation and constant validation, I had learned to sustain long-term effort toward goals that others couldn't see or understand. The transformation was evident in everything from how I dressed for client meetings to how I spoke about my work in professional settings. I had developed the vocabulary and confidence to discuss complex technological concepts with C-level executives, to present budget projections to finance teams, and to train corporate employees on systems I had designed and built. These weren't skills you could learn in traditional employment. They required the kind of independent learning, self-motivation, and strategic thinking that my family had never recognized, much less valued. Every successful client interaction was proof that their assessment of my potential had been fundamentally wrong. During this period of rapid business growth, I also became more involved in the real estate investment community. I joined local investor groups, attended seminars on property management and market analysis, and started networking with other young entrepreneurs who were building wealth through real estate. What I discovered was that my story wasn't unique. In its broad outlines, many successful investors had been underestimated by family members who didn't understand non-traditional paths to financial success. But it was unusual in its specific combination of technology business and real estate investment at such a young age. One evening, at a real estate investor meetup, I found myself in a conversation with a man in his 50s who owned dozens of properties throughout the city. When I mentioned that I had recently purchased my first commercial building, he asked about my background and how I had accumulated the capital for such a significant investment. As I explained my path from freelance web development to technology consulting to real estate ownership, he listened with the kind of attention that told me he was genuinely impressed. That's exactly the kind of diversified wealth-building strategy that creates real financial independence, he said. Most people your age are still figuring out their career direction. You're already building multiple income streams and long-term assets. You're going to be extremely wealthy by the time you're 40 if you keep making decisions like this. His prediction felt both thrilling and surreal. Wealthy. The word had never applied to me before, but as I calculated my current net worth and projected the growth of my business and real estate investments, I realized he might be right. The technology contracts were providing substantial monthly income that I was reinvesting into property acquisitions. The real estate was appreciating in value while generating rental income that reduced my personal living expenses. The combination was creating a compounding effect that would accelerate over time, especially as I gained experience and could take on larger, more profitable projects and investments. But wealth wasn't just about numbers in bank accounts or property values. It was about freedom, options, and the ability to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. It was about never having to stay in a situation where people dismissed my potential or criticized my dreams. It was about being able to help other people who were struggling the way I had struggled, especially young women who were being told their technological interests weren't practical or valuable. The financial success was important, but the psychological freedom that came with it was transformative in ways that went far beyond money. As winter approached and I celebrated my first full quarter as a commercial property owner, I started thinking about whether and how to reveal my identity to Derek and my mother. The property management company had been handling all tenant communications, so they had no idea who the new owner was. They were simply enjoying improved maintenance, response times, and wondering why their landlord seemed more responsive than the previous owners had been. Part of me wanted to maintain the anonymity indefinitely, to continue being the invisible benefactor who ensured their housing remained affordable and well-maintained. But another part of me knew that eventually, they needed to understand what they had missed, what they had failed to see, and what their lack of support had cost them in terms of our relationship. The decision about how and when to reveal the truth would depend on what served the larger purpose of my life, which was no longer about proving them wrong, but about building something meaningful and sustainable. I had moved beyond needing their validation or approval. My business was thriving, my investments were performing well, and I was surrounded by professional relationships with people who respected my work and valued my contributions. The question wasn't whether they would eventually learn that their lazy stepdaughter had become their landlord. The question was whether that revelation would serve any purpose beyond satisfying my sense of poetic justice. Either way, I was ready for whatever conversation would eventually come, because I was no longer the uncertain young woman who had packed her belongings after that laptop crashed against the wall. I was someone who had built 2 successful businesses, owned valuable real estate, and created a life that reflected my values rather than their limitations. The moment that changed everything happened on a cold February morning when my phone rang at 7:30 a.m. It was Jessica from the property management company, and her voice carried the kind of urgency that immediately gets your attention. "Riley, I'm sorry to call so early, but we have a situation at the Maple Street building. The city is requiring all property owners to attend a community meeting tonight about proposed zoning changes that could affect rental properties in the area. As the owner, you need to be there to represent your interests." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a maintenance request I could handle through contractors or a financial decision I could make from behind the scenes. This was a public meeting where I would need to appear as the property owner, where my identity would become visible to anyone who cared to pay attention, including the tenants who lived in Units 4B and 4C. I spent the entire day wrestling with the implications. For 4 months, I had been the invisible landlord, making decisions that improved my family's living situation while they remained completely unaware of my involvement. I had approved a new security system for the building entrance after several tenants expressed concerns about package theft. I had hired a landscaping company to maintain the courtyard garden that Derek often sat in during his lunch breaks when he worked from home. I had even authorized the installation of high-speed internet infrastructure throughout the building, knowing that better connectivity would increase property values while making life easier for all the residents. Every decision had been made, with their well-being in mind, even though they had no idea who was making those choices. But tonight would be different. Tonight, I would have to walk into a room full of property owners, city council members, and concerned residents, and publicly identify myself as the owner of a multi-million-dollar apartment building. There would be no hiding behind property, management companies, or anonymous improvement projects. I would have to speak up for my interests, ask questions about how the proposed changes would affect my investment, and demonstrate the kind of business knowledge that my family had never believed I possessed. The irony was almost overwhelming. The same people who had called me lazy and unrealistic were about to discover that I was not only financially successful enough to own their building, but knowledgeable enough about real estate law and municipal politics to advocate for my property rights in a public forum. I arrived at the community center 20 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that projected exactly the kind of professional authority the situation required. The meeting room was already filling with people, mostly older property owners and longtime residents who had been through similar zoning discussions before. I recognized several faces from real estate investor meetups, and they nodded at me, with the kind of respectful acknowledgement that successful people give each other. To them, I wasn't unusually young or surprisingly successful. I was simply another investor protecting her assets, which was exactly how I had learned to see myself. As more people arrived, I spotted Derek and my mother entering together, both looking slightly uncomfortable in a setting that was clearly outside their normal experience. They chose seats near the back of the room, and I could see Derek scanning the crowd with the kind of suspicious expression he usually reserved for situations where he felt out of his depth. My mother was clutching a small notebook, probably planning to take notes about anything that might affect their rent or living situation. Neither of them looked in my direction, and I realized they had no reason to expect that someone they knew would be at a meeting for property owners. The city planning director opened the discussion by explaining the proposed zoning changes, which would allow for increased density in certain residential areas while imposing new restrictions on rental property modifications. As she spoke, I took detailed notes about how each proposed change would affect my building specifically, calculating potential impacts on rental income, property values, and future improvement plans. This was exactly the kind of analytical thinking that had driven my success in both technology and real estate. The ability to quickly process complex information and identify the implications for my business interests. When the floor opened, for questions and comments, several property owners spoke up about their concerns. I listened carefully to their arguments, learning from their experience while formulating my own position on the issues. After about 30 minutes of discussion, I realized that no one had addressed a specific concern that was particularly relevant to my property. I raised my hand and waited to be recognized by the moderator. "Yes, the young woman in the gray suit," she said, pointing in my direction. I stood up, and for just a moment, I caught Derek's expression as he noticed me for the first time. His face went through a sequence of emotions: confusion, recognition, and then something that looked like bewilderment. "Thank you," I said, projecting my voice clearly across the room. "I own the 40-unit building at 847 Maple Street, and I have a specific question about how the proposed density changes would affect existing properties that are already at maximum occupancy under current zoning." As I spoke, I could see my mother turning in her seat, her face showing the same progression of shock and confusion that Derek had displayed moments earlier. I continued with my question, explaining my concerns about grandfather clauses and compliance requirements, demonstrating exactly the kind of detailed property knowledge that comes from serious involvement in real estate investment. The planning director responded to my question thoughtfully, and I asked 2 follow-up questions that showed I understood the nuances of municipal zoning law. Other property owners nodded approvingly at my questions, recognizing that I was raising issues that affected all of them. One older gentleman even approached me after my questions to say that I had brought up points he hadn't considered, and that my concerns were exactly the kind of issues that needed to be addressed before any changes were implemented. In that moment, I felt the full weight of how completely my family had misunderstood my capabilities and potential. After the formal presentation ended, the meeting broke into smaller groups where property owners could discuss specific concerns with city staff members. I joined a group that was focused on rental property regulations, contributing to a conversation about compliance costs and implementation timelines. As I discussed cash flow analysis and regulatory impact assessments with other investors, I became aware that Derek and my mother were standing about 10 feet away, clearly trying to overhear my conversations without making their presence obvious. The situation felt surreal. They were literally eavesdropping on their landlord discussing their building, not knowing that the professional young woman talking about cap rates and property management strategies was the same person they had, dismissed as unemployable just 2 years earlier. When the meeting officially ended, I spent a few more minutes exchanging business cards with other property owners and discussing potential collaboration opportunities. Real estate investment, I had learned, was often about building relationships with other professionals who could provide insights, referrals, and partnership possibilities. As I wrapped up these conversations and started heading toward the exit, I saw Derek and my mother lingering near the door, clearly debating whether to approach me. The uncertainty on their faces was almost comical. They obviously wanted to understand how and why I was at a meeting for property owners, but they had no context for interpreting what they had witnessed. Finally, as I reached the lobby area, my mother stepped forward hesitantly. "Riley, we didn't expect to see you here. Do you work for a property management company now?" Her question revealed how limited their understanding of my professional life had become. Even after witnessing me ask sophisticated questions about zoning law and participate in discussions about rental property investment, her first assumption was that I must be an employee rather than an owner. Derek stood slightly behind her, his expression somewhere between suspicious and confused, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I could have given them a simple answer that avoided the full revelation. I could have said I was there as a consultant or representative for a client. I could have deflected their questions and left them to wonder about my presence at the meeting. But standing there in that lobby, surrounded by other property owners who had treated me as an equal and respected my expertise, I realized that the time for partial truths had passed. They deserved to know who I had become, not because I needed their approval or validation, but because honesty was part of who I had chosen to be as I built my business and my life. "I'm here because I own rental property in the area," I said simply. The zoning changes could affect my investment, so I wanted to understand the proposed regulations and make sure my concerns were heard. Derek's eyebrows shot up, and my mother blinked several times as if she was trying to process information that didn't fit her understanding of reality. "You own rental property?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "Since when? How could you afford? We thought you were still doing computer work." "I am still doing computer work," I replied. "My technology business is actually how I was able to get into real estate investment. The income from my clients provided the capital for property purchases." I watched as they exchanged glances, clearly struggling to reconcile this information with their long-standing belief that my computer work was somehow illegitimate or financially unviable. Derek cleared his throat and asked the question I could see forming in his mind. "What kind of rental property do you own?" The moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the next words would fundamentally change our relationship forever. I could feel the weight of every dismissive comment they had made, every time they had called my work worthless, every moment they had suggested I needed to find a real job. But I also felt the confidence that came from 2 years of proving myself in ways they had never imagined possible. "I own your building," I said quietly. 847 Maple Street. I bought it 4 months ago. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear conversations from other groups across the lobby. Derek's mouth actually fell open, and my mother's notebook slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet between us. I could see them both trying to process the implications, calculating backwards from this moment to all the improved maintenance and responsive property management they had been enjoying since the building changed ownership. "That's impossible," Derek finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're 24 years old. You can't own a building like that. Do you know how much those properties cost?" His disbelief was so complete that he seemed unable to accept the evidence of what he had just witnessed. Me participating in a property owners' meeting, discussing zoning regulations with other investors, demonstrating exactly the kind of business knowledge that would be required to own and manage commercial real estate. My mother was staring at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. "Riley, honey, I don't understand. When did this happen? How did this happen? We had no idea you were involved in anything like this." The hurt in her voice was mixed with confusion and what sounded like genuine bewilderment. They had been so convinced of their assessment of my potential that they couldn't quickly adjust to evidence that contradicted everything they believed about my capabilities and ambitions. "It happened gradually," I explained, maintaining the calm, professional tone I had developed through years of client presentations and business negotiations. "I started with freelance web development, built that into a consulting business, saved aggressively, bought a small duplex, learned about property management and investment analysis, and eventually accumulated enough capital and expertise to purchase larger properties. The building you live in was my first major commercial acquisition." Derek shook his head slowly, as if he was trying to wake up from a confusing dream. "But you were just playing on computers. You never had a real job. You never showed us any money or contracts or anything that looked like actual business." His words revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had driven our conflict for years. He had equated visibility with validity, assuming that work had to look traditional to be valuable, that success had to be obvious to outside observers to be real. "I was building a business," I said simply. "Client work, contracts, income, savings, investments. All of it was real, even if it didn't look like what you expected work to look like. The money I earned from web development and consulting is what allowed me to buy real estate. The skills I learned managing technology projects are what prepared me to manage property investments. Everything was connected, even when it didn't appear that way from the outside." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had. For the first time in years, they asked genuine questions about my work, my business, my investment strategy, and my plans for the future. The tone was different too, not the dismissive skepticism they had always shown before, but the kind of curious respect you give someone whose success you're trying to understand. Derek wanted to know how web development could possibly generate enough income to support real estate investment. My mother asked about the transition from technology work to property ownership, clearly struggling to connect the dots between the daughter she thought she knew and the business owner she was discovering. As we talked, other property owners occasionally approached to continue conversations we had started during the meeting. Each interaction reinforced the professional identity I had established in the real estate community, showing Derek and my mother that I wasn't just claiming to be a property owner. I was actually recognized and respected as one by other investors. One woman mentioned a potential partnership opportunity she wanted to discuss. A man handed me his card and suggested we meet to talk about a property management software solution his company was developing. Every exchange was evidence of the professional relationships and business opportunities that had grown around my success. The drive home that night felt like traveling between two different worlds. For years, I had been building a professional identity and financial success that my family had never seen or acknowledged. Tonight, those two worlds had finally collided in a way that forced them to confront the gap between their perception of me and the reality of what I had accomplished. But the revelation also forced me to confront my own feelings about success, family, and the complex emotions that come with proving wrong the people whose approval you once craved. Over the following weeks, the dynamic between us shifted in ways that felt both satisfying and complicated. Derek started asking questions about my technology business with genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. My mother called to check in on my work and investments, clearly trying to understand a daughter she realized she had never really known. They both became more careful about their language around work and success, as if they were aware that their previous assumptions had been not just wrong, but harmful. But the changes weren't just in how they treated me. The success itself had changed me in ways that went beyond financial security or professional recognition. I had developed confidence in my judgment, trust in my ability to learn and adapt, and clarity about my values and priorities. I no longer needed their approval to feel legitimate, their understanding to feel successful, or their support to feel confident about my choices. The business and real estate investments had given me something more valuable than money. They had given me complete independence from other people's opinions about my worth and potential. The most meaningful transformation, though, was in how I started thinking about helping other people who were in situations similar to what mine had been. I began mentoring young women who were interested in technology careers, especially those whose families didn't understand or support their ambitions. I started speaking at community college business programs about entrepreneurship and real estate investment for young adults. I even began planning a scholarship program for students pursuing non-traditional career paths in technology and business. These activities felt like the natural extension of everything I had learned during my journey from dismissed stepdaughter to successful entrepreneur and property owner. The skills that had allowed me to build a technology business were the same skills that helped me succeed in real estate investment: analytical thinking, persistent effort, willingness to learn continuously, and the ability to see opportunities that others missed. More importantly, the confidence that came from proving myself in business gave me the foundation to help other people who were struggling with similar challenges and doubts. As spring approached, and I celebrated my first full year as a commercial property owner, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that laptop crashed against the living room wall. The broken computer had been replaced by a sophisticated home office setup that supported a technology consulting business generating mid-six-figure annual revenue. The studio apartment had been replaced by a beautiful two-bedroom condo that I owned outright. The uncertain young woman who packed her belongings in anger and hurt had been replaced by a confident entrepreneur who owned multiple properties and employed a growing team of professionals. But perhaps the most important change was in how I understood the relationship between work, success, and personal fulfillment. I had learned that meaningful work doesn't always look like what previous generations expect, that financial success can come from industries and approaches that seem unfamiliar to people who aren't part of them, and that building a life on your own terms requires the courage to persist even when the people closest to you don't understand or support your vision. The journey from family disappointment to business success had taught me that sometimes the most important validation comes not from changing other people's minds, but from proving to yourself that their limitations don't have to become your limitations. 6 months after the community meeting revelation, I stood in front of 300 aspiring entrepreneurs at the Portland Convention Center, delivering the keynote address for the Young Professionals Summit. The title of my presentation was Building Wealth in the Digital Age: How Non-Traditional Careers Create Traditional Success. And as I looked out at the audience of 20 and 30-somethings, I saw dozens of faces that reminded me of myself 3 years earlier. Intelligent, ambitious people whose families probably didn't understand their career choices, whose dreams seemed impractical to older generations, whose quiet determination was mistaken for laziness by people who equated success with visible struggle. The invitation to speak had come through my growing reputation in both the technology and real estate communities. Word had spread about the young woman who had built a multi-six-figure consulting business while simultaneously becoming a commercial property owner, and organizations that focused on entrepreneurship and alternative career paths wanted to hear my story. But standing on that stage, I wasn't thinking about my own achievements. I was thinking about the girl who had sat at her mother's kitchen table 2.5 years earlier, trying to explain why her computer work was valuable while Derek dismissed it as playing games. That girl had needed someone to tell her that. Her instincts were right, that her path was valid, that the people who couldn't see her potential were limited by their own perspectives rather than her actual capabilities. 3 years ago, I began. My stepfather threw my laptop across the room because he thought I was wasting my life. He called me lazy for spending hours on my computer. My mother suggested I get a job at the mall because my work didn't look real to them. Today, my technology consulting business employs 8 people and generates annual revenue that exceeds what both of them earn combined. I own commercial real estate worth over $4 million. And yes, I'm still spending hours on my computer every day because that's where 21st century wealth is built. The audience laughed and applauded, but I could see in their faces that many of them had lived similar experiences. The young man in the third row who was probably building an app while his parents asked when he was going to find a real job. The woman near the center who might be developing an online business while her family wondered why she couldn't just work at a bank like her sister. The entrepreneurs in the back who were likely investing in cryptocurrency or e-commerce while their relatives warned them about get-rich-quick schemes. Every person in that room understood what it felt like to pursue opportunities that were invisible to people who measured success by outdated standards. The biggest obstacle to building wealth in the modern economy, I continued, isn't lack of opportunity. It's other people's inability to recognize opportunity when it doesn't look like what they expect success to look like. The internet has created more paths to financial independence than any previous generation has ever had access to. But those paths often require you to ignore the advice of people who built their careers in completely different economic circumstances. As I spoke about the specifics of building a technology business, finding clients, developing systems, scaling operations, managing cash flow, I could see audience members taking detailed notes. But when I transitioned to discussing real estate investment as a wealth-building strategy for young entrepreneurs, the energy in the room shifted to something even more focused. These weren't just people who wanted to earn good incomes from their businesses. These were people who wanted to build generational wealth, who understood that true financial freedom required multiple income streams and long-term asset accumulation. Real estate investment isn't just for people in their 40s and 50s who have accumulated capital through traditional careers, I explained. If you're earning significant income from a business, especially a scalable digital business, you can start building a property portfolio in your 20s. The key is understanding that real estate and technology businesses complement each other perfectly. One provides cash flow for investment capital, the other provides long-term wealth accumulation and passive income. After the presentation, I was surrounded by young entrepreneurs who wanted to discuss specific strategies for transitioning from business income to investment assets. A 26-year-old woman who had built a successful social media marketing agency asked about analyzing rental property cash flows. A man in his early 30s who had developed a popular mobile app wanted to know about commercial real estate, financing for self-employed borrowers. A college student who was earning substantial income from YouTube and affiliate marketing was interested in house hacking strategies that would allow her to live for free while building equity. These conversations energized me in ways that even successful client projects couldn't match. Every question was evidence that the next generation of entrepreneurs was thinking strategically about wealth building, that they understood the importance of converting business income into long-term assets, that they were willing to learn complex topics like real estate analysis and property management to achieve financial independence. They weren't just building businesses, they were building legacies. But the most meaningful moment came during the networking reception, when a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "I've been building an online course business for 2 years, and my parents have been pressuring me to quit and get a corporate job because they think what I'm doing isn't stable or legitimate. After hearing your presentation today, I realized that I'm not the problem. Their understanding of work is just limited by their own experience. You gave me permission to trust my own judgment about my career path." Her words hit me with unexpected emotional force. This was exactly why I had accepted the speaking invitation, why I had been willing to share personal details about my family conflict and business journey. There were thousands of young people who were building innovative businesses and pursuing non-traditional career paths while facing skepticism and criticism from the people who should have been supporting them. If my story could help even a few of them trust their instincts and persist through family pressure, then every difficult moment of my own journey had served a purpose beyond my personal success. The speaking opportunities that followed that keynote address opened doors I hadn't anticipated. Universities invited me to talk to business students about entrepreneurship and early-stage investing. Professional organizations asked me to present workshops on technology consulting and real estate investment strategies. Podcasts wanted to interview me about building wealth as a young entrepreneur. Each platform allowed me to reach more people who needed to hear that non-traditional paths to success were not just valid, but often more lucrative and sustainable than conventional career approaches. Meanwhile, my core businesses continued to grow in ways that reinforced every principle I had been sharing with audiences. The technology consulting firm had expanded beyond web development to include comprehensive digital transformation projects. For mid-size companies, we were helping traditional businesses implement cloud computing solutions, develop e-commerce platforms, and create data analytics systems that improved their operational efficiency. The work was intellectually challenging, financially rewarding, and professionally fulfilling in ways that Derek and my mother were finally beginning to understand. My real estate portfolio had grown to include 3 properties: the original duplex where I had learned the fundamentals of property management, the 40-unit apartment building where Derek and my mother lived, and a small office complex that housed my technology consulting business, along with several other professional services companies. The combined rental income from these properties was approaching my consulting revenue, creating the kind of passive income streams that would eventually allow me to work by choice rather than necessity. But the most satisfying development was the scholarship program I had established for students pursuing technology and entrepreneurship education. Working with 3 community colleges in the Portland area, I was funding full scholarships for young women who demonstrated aptitude for business or technology, but lacked family support for non-traditional career paths. The program included not just tuition assistance, but mentorship, internship opportunities, and networking connections that would help recipients build successful careers in emerging industries. The first recipient was a 19-year-old named Maria, whose parents had immigrated from Mexico and wanted her to become a nurse or teacher because those were careers they understood and respected. Maria had taught herself basic programming and was passionate about developing apps that would help Spanish-speaking communities access government services and healthcare information. Her parents saw her computer time as distraction from her studies and couldn't understand why she wouldn't pursue a more traditional professional path. Through the scholarship program, Maria was able to enroll in an intensive coding boot camp while working part-time to help support her family. I met with her monthly to discuss her progress, help her navigate challenges, and provide the kind of encouragement that I had never received when I was developing my own technology skills. Watching her confidence grow as she mastered new programming, languages and started building sophisticated applications reminded me of my own transformation from uncertain beginner to confident professional. "You're giving me more than money for school," Maria told me during one of our mentorship meetings. "You're giving me proof that people like us can succeed in technology, that our families' fears about non-traditional careers don't have to limit our potential. When I see what you've accomplished, I know that what I'm learning is valuable, even when other people don't understand it." Her words crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't articulated about the broader purpose of my success. Individual achievement was satisfying, but using that achievement to create opportunities for other people was transformative in ways that went far beyond personal fulfillment. Every scholarship recipient, every speaking engagement, every mentorship conversation was evidence that success without service was incomplete, that true wealth included the responsibility to help others who were facing similar challenges. The ripple effects extended into my relationship with Derek and my mother as well. As they watched me speak at conferences, mentor young entrepreneurs, and build programs that helped other families understand non-traditional career paths, their perspective on my work continued to evolve. Derek, who had once dismissed computer work as playing games, started asking detailed questions about how technology was changing different industries. My mother, who had worried that my career path was too risky, began telling her friends about my business success and community involvement with obvious pride. The transformation in our relationship became most apparent during a family dinner celebrating my 26th birthday. Instead of the tense conversations about my future that had characterized previous gatherings, we spent the evening discussing business strategy, real estate market trends, and the scholarship program. Derek asked thoughtful questions about property management and seemed genuinely interested in learning about real estate investment. My mother wanted to know about the young women I was mentoring and whether there were ways she could volunteer with the program. "I owe you an apology," Derek said as we were clearing the dishes. "I was wrong about your work, wrong about your potential, and wrong about what success looks like in the modern economy. I let my own limitations prevent me from seeing what you were building. You've accomplished more by 26 than most people achieve in their entire careers, and you did it by trusting your instincts when everyone around you was giving you different advice." His apology meant more to me than I had expected it would, not because I needed his validation to feel successful, but because it represented growth in his understanding of how the world was changing and what opportunities existed for people who were willing to adapt to new economic realities. The man, who had once thrown my laptop across the room, was now asking me to teach him about digital marketing for his construction business, recognizing that even traditional industries needed to embrace technology to remain competitive. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when my mother pulled me aside later that evening. "I've been thinking about something," she said quietly. "When you were growing up, I was so focused on protecting you from disappointment that I couldn't see your actual potential. I was afraid of dreams that seemed too big or too different from what I understood. I realize now that my fear was holding you back, and I'm grateful that you were strong enough to pursue your vision even when I couldn't support it." Her words addressed something I hadn't fully realized I needed to hear. The hurt from their criticism and dismissal had been healed by my success, but there had still been a part of me that wondered whether they could ever truly understand what I had accomplished and why it mattered. Her acknowledgement that fear had driven their skepticism, rather than any real assessment of my capabilities, provided a kind of closure that allowed me to fully forgive the pain they had caused while still maintaining the independence I had fought to achieve. As that birthday evening ended and I drove home to my own place, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since the night I packed my belongings and left their apartment. The broken laptop had been replaced by a sophisticated home office that supported a thriving consulting business. The uncertainty about my future had been replaced by clear goals and the financial resources to achieve them. The hurt from their dismissal had been transformed into motivation that drove me to help other young people who were facing similar challenges. But the most important transformation was internal. I had developed unshakable confidence in my judgment, my abilities, and my vision for the future. I no longer needed external validation to feel successful or approval from others to feel worthy. The business achievements and real estate investments were satisfying, but the real victory was psychological. The knowledge that I could trust myself to make good decisions, overcome obstacles, and build the kind of life I wanted regardless of what other people thought was possible or practical. Standing in my home office later that night, looking at the wall where I had hung awards from professional organizations, photos from speaking engagements, and thank you letters from scholarship recipients, I understood that the journey from dismissed stepdaughter to successful entrepreneur had been about much more than proving my family wrong. It had been about discovering what I was capable of when I stopped asking for permission to pursue my dreams and started taking responsibility for making them reality. The girl who had sat at that kitchen table 3 years earlier, trying to explain why her computer work was valuable, had been right about her potential but wrong about needing others to recognize it. Success hadn't required their understanding or approval. It had required persistent effort, continuous learning, strategic thinking, and the courage to build something meaningful even when the people closest to me couldn't see its value. Every achievement since then had been proof that the only validation that truly mattered was the kind you gave yourself by doing the work and getting the results that reflected your actual capabilities rather than other people's limited expectations. The lazy daughter they had dismissed was now a business owner, property investor, public speaker, and mentor who was helping shape the next generation of entrepreneurs. And every day, I woke up grateful that their inability to see my potential had forced me to discover it for myself, because the confidence that came from self-made success was stronger and more sustainable than any approval they could have given me. The woman I had become wasn't just successful by conventional standards. She was free to define success on her own terms and use that success to create opportunities for others who needed someone to believe in their potential when their own families couldn't see it. 3 years after that transformative birthday dinner, I stood in the conference room of my newly constructed headquarters building, watching my team of 27 employees collaborate on a project that would revolutionize how small cities manage their digital infrastructure. The technology consulting firm that had started with me working alone on a broken laptop now occupied 3 floors of a building I owned outright, with satellite offices in Seattle and Denver. But the moment that truly crystallized how far I had traveled from that night, Derek through my laptop, wasn't about the business metrics or real estate portfolio. It was about the email I had just received from the mayor of Portland, asking me to serve on the city's Economic Development Advisory Committee. The email represented something I had never imagined when I was defending my computer work at my mother's kitchen table. I wasn't just a successful business owner anymore. I was being recognized as a community leader whose expertise was valuable to municipal planning and economic policy. The same skills that Derek had dismissed as playing games were now considered essential qualifications for advising city government on how to attract and support the technology companies that were driving Portland's economic growth. The girl who had been called lazy was being asked to help shape the future of an entire metropolitan area. As I read through the mayor's invitation, I thought about the scholarship recipients who would see this appointment announcement in the Sioux local business journal. Young women like Maria, who had graduated from her coding boot camp and was now working as a software developer while building her own app on the side. Students like Jennifer, who had used her scholarship to study data science and was now helping nonprofit organizations use analytics to improve their community programs. Entrepreneurs like Sarah, who had started an e-commerce business selling handmade jewelry online, while her family insisted she needed a traditional retail job. Each of these women had faced the same fundamental challenge I had encountered: families who couldn't recognize the value of non-traditional career paths, who equated unfamiliar work with illegitimate work, who confused invisible progress with no progress. Seeing someone who had walked their path achieve recognition at the highest levels of business and civic leadership would reinforce what I tried to teach all of them: that success in the modern economy often looked different from what previous generations expected, but it was no less real or valuable for being unconventional. The advisory committee appointment was particularly meaningful because it represented the completion of a transformation that had been years in the making. I wasn't just proving that technology entrepreneurship could generate personal wealth. I was demonstrating that digital business skills were essential for community prosperity. The same analytical thinking that had allowed me to build profitable, Businesses was exactly what cities needed to compete for innovation-driven companies and create economic opportunities for residents who were adapting to rapidly changing job markets. But the appointment also came with responsibilities that extended far beyond my personal success story. As one of the youngest people ever selected for the committee, I would be representing the perspective of entrepreneurs who were building the future economy, while older committee members focused on traditional industries and conventional development strategies. My role would be to bridge the gap between established business communities and emerging technology sectors, helping civic leaders understand how to support innovation while ensuring that economic growth benefited all residents rather than just people who were already wealthy. The first committee meeting was scheduled for the following month, and I spent weeks preparing for discussions that would shape Portland's economic development strategy for the next 5 years. Reading through planning documents and budget analyses, I was struck by how many of the challenges facing the city were exactly the kinds of problems that technology solutions could address. Affordable housing shortages could be tackled with better data analysis and streamlined permitting processes. Small business development could be accelerated with improved digital infrastructure and online resources. Workforce development could be enhanced with remote learning platforms and virtual training programs. These weren't abstract policy discussions for me. Every challenge the committee would address connected directly to my experience building businesses, creating jobs, and helping other entrepreneurs navigate obstacles that prevented them from achieving their potential. When we discussed strategies for attracting technology companies, I could provide insights based on actually running a tech business and understanding what factors influenced location decisions. When we analyzed barriers to small business growth, I could share perspectives, from helping dozens of entrepreneurs through my mentorship programs and speaking engagements. The night before my first committee meeting, I had dinner with Derek and my mother at a restaurant near my office building. The conversation that evening perfectly illustrated how completely our relationship had evolved since those early days of conflict over my career choices. Instead of questioning my work or suggesting I needed more stability, they were asking detailed questions about my committee role and offering their own insights about economic development from their perspectives as longtime Portland residents. "I keep thinking about that night when I threw your laptop," Derek said as we waited for dessert. "I was so convinced that you were wasting time, that you needed to focus on real work and practical goals. I couldn't see that you were actually preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity. The skills you were developing were preparing you to be a leader in industries that didn't even exist when I was your age." His reflection highlighted something important about how rapidly the economy had changed and why family conflict around career choices had become so common for my generation. Derek wasn't wrong to value work ethic and practical planning. Those qualities had served him well in construction and would always be important for any kind of success. But he had been measuring my work against standards that were becoming obsolete, assuming that visible physical effort was the only indicator of real productivity. "The funny thing is that you did teach me about work ethic," I replied. "Watching you build projects from the ground up, seeing how you planned and executed complex construction jobs, learning about quality control and customer service. All of that influenced how I approached building my business. The difference was that my work happened on computers instead of construction sites, but the fundamental principles were the same." My mother nodded thoughtfully. "I think what I struggled with was that your success seemed so uncertain from the outside. When Derek went to work, we could see the building projects and the steady paycheck. When you worked on your computer, we couldn't see the clients or the contracts or the money being earned. It looked like you were just spending time online, and we worried that you were avoiding the kind of steady employment that felt secure to us." Her explanation helped me understand that their skepticism hadn't been entirely about doubting my capabilities. Part of it had been fear. Fear that I was taking risks they couldn't evaluate, pursuing opportunities they couldn't understand, building a future that seemed too different from what they knew to feel safe. Their criticism had been painful, but it had been motivated by love and concern, even if it had been expressed in ways that felt dismissive and hurtful. "I appreciate that you were trying to protect me," I said. "But I think what I needed was trust rather than protection. Trust that I was making thoughtful decisions, that I was learning from mistakes, that I was building something valuable even when you couldn't see the immediate results. That's actually what I try to give the young women I mentor now. Trust in their judgment, combined with support for their learning process." The dinner conversation that evening felt like the final resolution of tensions that had been building and releasing for years. We weren't just a family that had worked through conflict. We had become a family that understood each other's perspectives and could learn from different approaches to work and success. Derek and my mother had developed genuine appreciation for non-traditional career paths, while I had gained deeper understanding of why change felt threatening to people whose success had come through conventional routes. More importantly, our relationship had evolved to the point where they had become advocates for the kinds of entrepreneurship and innovation that I represented. Derek started referring potential clients to my technology consulting business when construction projects required digital solutions. My mother volunteered with my scholarship program, helping identify young women who would benefit from support and mentorship. They weren't just accepting my career choices. They were actively supporting my mission to help other people pursue similar paths. The first advisory committee meeting exceeded my expectations in every way. Rather than being treated as the token young person or the committee diversity appointment, I found myself contributing substantively to discussions about economic strategy and policy development. My analysis of how remote work trends were affecting commercial real estate markets influenced the committee's recommendations about zoning changes. My insights about digital infrastructure requirements helped shape the city's technology investment priorities. My perspective on entrepreneurship barriers informed new small business support programs. But the most impactful contribution came when we discussed workforce development strategies for residents who had been displaced by economic changes. Drawing on my experience with the scholarship program and mentorship work, I proposed a comprehensive approach that would combine technology, training with entrepreneurship education, helping people develop both the skills and the mindset needed to succeed in the evolving economy. Traditional job retraining programs assume that people need to find employment with existing companies, I explained to the committee. But many of the best economic opportunities today come from creating your own business or developing skills that allow you to work independently. We should be teaching people how to identify market opportunities, build client relationships, manage their own finances, and scale their services. Those capabilities create more economic resilience than just learning to perform specific tasks for employers. The proposal generated immediate interest from other committee members, particularly those who had been struggling to design programs that actually helped displaced workers achieve long-term financial stability. Within 3 months, we had developed a pilot program that combined technical skills training with business development education, mentorship from successful entrepreneurs, and seed funding for graduates who wanted to start their own companies. The pilot program became a model that other cities started adopting, and I found myself traveling to conferences across the country to speak about innovative approaches to economic development and workforce training. Each speaking engagement reinforced my growing reputation as someone who could bridge the gap between traditional business communities and emerging economic sectors, someone who understood both the practical challenges of building companies and the policy frameworks needed to support innovation. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. During a regional economic development conference in San Francisco, I was approached by a woman in her 50s who introduced herself as the mayor of a mid-sized city in Colorado. "I wanted to thank you for your presentation about entrepreneurship. Education," she said. "My daughter is 24 and has been building an online business while my husband and I keep pressuring her to get a corporate job. After hearing you speak, I realize we've been measuring her success against outdated standards. You've helped me understand that supporting her dreams doesn't mean enabling irresponsibility. It means recognizing that the economy has changed, and her generation has to navigate opportunities that didn't exist when we were building our careers. Her words reminded me of why I had accepted the committee appointment and continued speaking at conferences, despite the time it took away from my core businesses. Every parent who developed better understanding of non-traditional career paths, every young entrepreneur who gained confidence to persist through family skepticism, every community leader who learned to support innovation-driven economic development, all of these represented progress that extended far beyond my personal success story. As I flew home from San Francisco that evening, I reflected on the distance I had traveled from the night Derek threw my laptop across the room. The broken computer had been replaced by a sophisticated technology infrastructure that supported multiple businesses. The family conflict had been replaced by relationships built on mutual respect and understanding. The uncertainty about my future had been replaced by clear vision and the resources to achieve ambitious goals. But perhaps the most significant transformation was in how I understood the relationship between individual success and community impact. The wealth I had built through technology consulting and real estate investment was satisfying, but using that success to create opportunities for other people had given my achievements meaning that went far beyond personal financial security. Every scholarship recipient who launched a successful business, every mentorship conversation that helped someone persist through challenges, every policy recommendation that improved economic opportunities for residents, these were the measures of success that felt most important as my career matured. The girl who had been called lazy was now recognized as a community leader whose expertise was valued by government officials, business organizations, and academic institutions. The work that had been dismissed as playing games was now considered essential preparation for participating in economic development planning and policy creation. The family conflict that had felt devastating at the time had actually been the catalyst for developing the independence, resilience, and strategic thinking that made all of my subsequent achievements possible. Standing in my office that night, looking out at the Portland skyline that included buildings where my scholarship recipients now worked, properties that I owned, and government offices where policies I had influenced were being implemented, I understood that the journey from family disappointment to community leadership had been about much more than proving anyone wrong. It had been about discovering what became possible when you stopped asking for permission to pursue your vision and started taking responsibility for turning that vision into reality. The lazy daughter who had been kicked out for refusing to get a real job was now creating real jobs for dozens of employees, generating substantial tax revenue for the city and helping shape economic policies that would affect thousands of residents. Every achievement had been built on the foundation of skills that were invisible to people who equated work with physical effort, but essential for success in an economy increasingly driven by information, innovation, and technological capability. The woman I had become wasn't just successful by conventional measures. She was free to define success in terms of impact rather than just income, legacy rather than just lifestyle, contribution rather than just consumption. And every day, I woke up grateful that their inability to see my potential had forced me to prove it to myself, because the confidence that came from self-made success was stronger and more sustainable than any approval they could have given me from the beginning. 5 years later, I stood before an audience of 2,000 entrepreneurs at the Global Innovation Summit in Austin, Texas, preparing to deliver what would become one of the most widely shared keynote addresses in the event's history. The speech was titled, "From Dismissed to Indispensable: How Misunderstood Potential Becomes Unstoppable Purpose." And as I looked out at faces representing every continent and countless industries, I knew that many of them carried stories similar to mine. Brilliant minds that had been underestimated, revolutionary ideas that had been dismissed, persistent dreamers who had been called impractical by people who couldn't envision the future they were building. But this wasn't just another speaking engagement for me. This was the platform I had been preparing for my entire career. The opportunity to share insights that could transform how families, educators, and communities supported the next generation of innovators. The invitation had come through my work with the Riley Foundation, the nonprofit organization I had established to provide comprehensive support for young entrepreneurs who were pursuing non-traditional career paths. What had started as a small scholarship program had evolved into a national initiative that provided mentorship, funding, education, and advocacy for thousands of young people whose potential was being overlooked or actively discouraged by the adults in their lives. 10 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the vast auditorium. My stepfather threw my laptop across the room and called me lazy because I spent my days building websites and learning to code. He couldn't see that I was developing the exact skills that would allow me to create a technology consulting firm worth $50 million, acquire a real estate portfolio worth over $20 million, and employ more than 150 people across 4 cities. His inability to recognize emerging opportunities didn't make those opportunities less real. It just made him incapable of supporting my pursuit of them. The audience responded with immediate engagement, recognizing the universal challenge of pursuing innovation in environments that valued conformity over creativity. But as I continued speaking, I shifted the focus from my personal story to the broader implications of what happened when societies failed to recognize and nurture unconventional talent. The tragedy isn't just individual, I explained. When we dismiss young people whose ideas don't fit traditional categories, when we pressure them to abandon innovative projects for conventional careers, when we measure their potential against outdated standards, we don't just limit their personal success. We deprive our communities of the solutions they're capable of creating. Every young entrepreneur who gives up on their vision because family pressure becomes too overwhelming represents innovation that will never happen, problems that will never be solved, economic opportunities that will never be created. This perspective had emerged from years of working with scholarship recipients and mentoring hundreds of young entrepreneurs through the foundation. I had seen brilliant young women abandon promising technology startups to pursue nursing degrees because their families couldn't understand software development. I had watched gifted inventors shelve revolutionary product ideas to take accounting jobs because their parents equated visible employment with real security. I had counseled countless young people who possessed exactly the kind of creative problem-solving abilities that modern economies desperately needed, but who were being systematically discouraged from developing those capabilities. The Foundation's research had quantified what I had observed anecdotally. Our studies showed that young entrepreneurs who received family support were 3 times more likely to achieve significant business success than those who faced family opposition. More troubling, we had documented that family skepticism was disproportionately directed toward exactly the kinds of innovation-driven businesses that created the most jobs and generated the most economic growth. Traditional industries that were declining were still receiving family encouragement, while emerging sectors that were expanding rapidly were being treated as risky experiments. The problem isn't that families don't want their children to succeed, I continued in my keynote address. The problem is that success in rapidly changing economies often looks different from what previous generations experienced. Parents who built careers in manufacturing worry when their children want to develop apps. Families who achieved security through corporate employment feel nervous when their kids want to start online businesses. The disconnect isn't about different values. It's about different information about where opportunities actually exist. This insight had led to one of the Foundation's most successful programs. Intergenerational workshops that brought young entrepreneurs together with their parents and family members for intensive education about modern business and economic trends. Rather than asking families to simply trust their children's judgment, we provided parents with the information they needed to understand why their kids' career choices were actually practical responses to changing market conditions. The workshops had transformed thousands of family relationships while accelerating business success for young entrepreneurs who no longer had to choose between family harmony and professional ambition. Parents learned about the growth potential of digital businesses, the earning power of skilled freelancers, and the wealth-building possibilities of early-stage investing. Young people gained confidence from family support while learning to communicate, their vision in language that addressed their parents' practical concerns about security and sustainability. But the foundation's work extended far beyond individual family dynamics. We had also developed partnerships with universities, community colleges, and high schools to integrate entrepreneurship education into curriculum that had traditionally focused only on preparing students for employment. The goal wasn't to convince everyone to start businesses, but to ensure that all students understood the full range of economic opportunities available to them and developed the skills needed to create value in rapidly evolving markets. One of our most innovative programs paired high school students with successful entrepreneurs for year-long mentorship relationships that included both business education and real project experience. Students learned to identify market opportunities, develop business plans, manage budgets, and build customer relationships while working on actual companies under experienced guidance. By graduation, many had already generated significant income from their projects and were prepared to either launch independent businesses or bring entrepreneurial skills to traditional employment. The results were extraordinary. Students who participated in our mentorship program were 5 times more likely to start businesses within 5 years of graduation, and their average starting salaries in traditional jobs were 40% higher than their peers because they possessed both technical skills and business understanding. Even more importantly, they demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability when facing economic disruption, because they understood how to create opportunities rather than just respond to existing ones. Education that only prepares young people to fill existing jobs is education that prepares them for a world that's disappearing, I told the Austin audience. The most valuable thing we can teach the next generation is how to identify problems that need solving and develop the capabilities to solve them. That's what entrepreneurship really is. Problem solving that creates value for other people while building sustainable income for yourself. This philosophy had influenced educational policy at state and national levels through my work with various advisory committees and policy organizations. The workforce development programs I had helped design were being implemented in dozens of cities, creating pathways for people to transition from declining industries to growing sectors through combination of technical training and business education. The policy work had also connected me with other entrepreneurs and business leaders who were working to create more supportive environments for innovation and economic development. These relationships had led to collaborative projects that leveraged collective resources to address challenges that individual companies couldn't solve alone. One such collaboration had produced the Innovation District Initiative, a comprehensive approach to urban development that concentrated technology companies, educational institutions, and support services in designated areas that were designed to foster entrepreneurship and knowledge-based economic growth. I had helped design the financial structure that made these districts viable while ensuring they created opportunities for existing residents rather than displacing them. The initiative was now being implemented in 12 cities across the United States, with plans for international expansion. Each district included affordable housing for entrepreneurs, shared workspace for early-stage companies, educational facilities that offered both traditional and entrepreneurship-focused programs, and community centers that hosted events designed to connect residents with business opportunities and resources. But perhaps the most personally meaningful aspect of my work had been the opportunity to help other families avoid the conflicts and misunderstandings that had characterized my early relationship with Derek and my mother. Through the Foundation's family education programs, I had witnessed hundreds of transformations as parents learned to recognize and support their children's entrepreneurial potential. One particularly memorable example involved a family from rural Oregon whose daughter had been building a successful e-commerce business selling handmade crafts, while her parents pressured her to abandon the business and attend college for a more traditional career. The daughter, Jessica, was earning more from her online sales than most college graduates made in entry-level jobs, but her parents couldn't see past their assumption that internet businesses weren't real careers. Through our family workshop program, Jessica's parents learned about the size and growth rate of the e-commerce industry, the skills required for successful online business management, and the long-term wealth-building potential of scalable digital businesses. They also connected with other parents whose children had built successful online companies, providing them with community support for understanding and embracing non-traditional career paths. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, Jessica's parents had become her biggest advocates, helping her expand her business by connecting her with local artisans who could supply additional products and introducing her to potential customers in their community networks. The business grew from a solo operation to a company employing 12 people, and Jessica was featured in national publications as an example of successful rural entrepreneurship. That story represents exactly what's possible when families become allies instead of obstacles, I shared with the Austin audience. Jessica's success wasn't just about her individual talent or determination. It was about creating an environment where her potential could be fully realized. Every family that learns to support entrepreneurship, every community that embraces innovation, every educational institution that teaches creative problem-solving is contributing to economic prosperity that benefits everyone. The speech concluded with a challenge that had become central to my public advocacy. The question isn't whether the next generation will face economic disruption and technological change. That's guaranteed. The question is whether we'll prepare them to thrive in that environment or leave them struggling to adapt to opportunities they've never been taught to recognize. The choice we make today about how we support young innovators will determine whether our communities prosper or decline in the decades ahead. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Standing ovations, social media shares, and interview requests from major publications followed the keynote address. But more importantly, I received hundreds of messages from audience members who committed to changing how they supported young entrepreneurs in their own families, companies, and communities. The real impact, though, came in the months that followed, as organizations around the world implemented programs inspired by the Foundation's work. Universities established entrepreneurship tracks that combined technical education with business development. Companies created mentorship programs that connected experienced employees with young entrepreneurs. Government agencies developed policies that supported innovation-driven economic development, while ensuring benefits reached all community members. Each implementation represented progress toward the vision that had motivated me since those early days of family conflict over my career choices. A world where young people's potential was recognized and supported, regardless of whether their ideas fit traditional categories, where families became partners in innovation rather than obstacles to it, where communities created environments that attracted and nurtured the kind of talent needed to solve complex challenges and build sustainable prosperity. Standing in my office that evening after returning from Austin, looking at walls covered with photos from speaking engagements, thank you letters from scholarship recipients, and articles about the Foundation's impact, I reflected on the journey, from that night when Derek threw my laptop across the room to this moment when my ideas were influencing economic development policy around the world. The girl who had been called lazy for spending time on computers was now recognized as a thought leader, whose insights about entrepreneurship, education, and economic development were shaping how entire societies prepared for the future. Family conflict that had felt devastating at the time had become the catalyst for work that was helping thousands of other families avoid similar misunderstandings while supporting the next generation of innovators. But the most profound transformation wasn't in external recognition or professional accomplishments. It was in understanding that individual success without broader impact was ultimately hollow, that true fulfillment came from using personal achievements to create opportunities for others, that the highest form of wealth was the ability to solve problems that improved life for entire communities. The woman I had become wasn't just someone who had overcome family skepticism to build successful businesses. She was someone who had transformed personal challenge into public service, who had converted private success into community benefit, who had used her platform to ensure that other young people wouldn't face the isolation and discouragement that had made her early entrepreneurial journey unnecessarily difficult. Every day brought new opportunities to expand that impact. Consulting requests from educational institutions, policy recommendations for government agencies, speaking invitations from organizations around the world, collaboration proposals from other entrepreneurs who shared similar missions. Each opportunity was evaluated against the same criterion that had guided my decisions since those early days of building my first business. Would this create value for other people while advancing the broader goal of supporting innovation and entrepreneurship? The answer was increasingly yes, because the network of relationships, resources, and influence I had built over the years had reached the point where individual actions could create systemic change. When I endorsed educational programs, they received funding and support that allowed them to expand. When I recommended policy approaches, they were implemented by government agencies looking for proven solutions. When I invested in young companies, they gained credibility that helped them attract additional capital and customers. This was the real measure of success that mattered most as my career entered its second decade. Not just what I had achieved personally, but what I had made possible for others, not just the wealth I had accumulated, but the opportunities I had created, not just the recognition I had received, but the recognition I had helped others earn for their own contributions to innovation and economic development. The lazy daughter they had dismissed was now someone whose work was making it easier for other families to recognize and support their children's potential, whose influence was helping communities create environments where innovation could flourish, whose foundation was ensuring that entrepreneurial dreams were supported rather than discouraged. And every day, I woke up grateful that their initial inability to see my potential had forced me to develop the resilience, determination, and strategic thinking that made all of this broader impact possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.